China's National People's Congress ended its annual session with the adoption of a new 5-year economic plan, aiming for at least 6.5% annual growth through 2020. China is transitioning from an export-driven economy to one driven more by domestic consumption as it goes through a period of slower growth and market volatility. In a wide-ranging news conference on Wednesday, Premier Li Keqiang addressed not only the economy but China's relations with its neighbors and the United States. There's much to talk about. To help us, we've gathered a distinguished panel of journalists. Joining us from London is Duncan Innes-Kerr. He's the Asia Regional Director for the Economist Intelligence Unit. With us here in Washington is the editor of the New Silk Road Monitor, Afshin Molavi. Pepe Escobar is an author and independent geopolitical analyst. He joins us from Paris, and with us from Beijing is CCTV news anchor Zhou Yue. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Let's start in Beijing with Zhou Yue. Let's first look at the Chinese economy. We just heard there from Premier Li Keqiang saying that China would not suffer a hard landing, not heading for recession. He also talked about China's new economy and more market reforms. Take us through some of the details.
Yes, indeed. This is actually the start of China's 13th five-year plan. Obviously, Chinese economy has been slowing down roughly to 6 to 7%. But more important is that China is want to overhaul its economy to have a better quality of its economic growth. I think there is some kind of a gap of perception on how the Chinese economy has been doing and what the world thinks China has been doing. Yes, there were some volatility in the Chinese stock market last year, but you have to understand that Chinese stock market is pretty small compared with a lot of advanced economies. Only 10% of Chinese have invested in the capital market, and Chinese investors are still new to this market. And the stock market does not necessarily represent how the general economy has been performing. China's economy has been slowing down for a world which has seen 3 decades of double-digit growth. That may be something new and alarming, but this is actually what China has been planning to do, not just something China has to stomach. China needs a better quality of its structure, not just a fast growth as it used to see. So what about equality? Now consumption has picked up, service has outstripped manufacturing, and China is cutting taxes and government red tapes. So I think China is doing well and on the right track. On the other hand, 6% of growth is still the envy of the world, except probably for India, which is still a much larger economy. So when Chinese Premier Li said a scenario of China's economy losing speed and hit the ground is probably just a fantasy.
Afshin, the One Belt, One Road initiative was discussed in both sessions. That is China's signature regional development project. What did we hear in those sessions that tell us about where this project is going, what's already been accomplished?
Well, I think what we saw is just a reinforcement of the importance of this One Belt, One Road initiative. And let's step back for a moment and think about. I mean, this is a breathtakingly ambitious initiative. And when you think about it, I view it as there's kind of two new Silk Roads. There's the organic commercial New Silk Road that has been taking place over the past 15 years or so. And I just came back from Dubai, and then I went to and interviewed some of the Chinese businesses that were there. And one of the things that they were telling me is they've been doing this for about 10 or 15 years. And they saw Dubai as an important hub, and they set up shop, and they're trading with Africa, trading with the Middle East. And this big Chinese demand engine has been absolutely vital to commodities producers in Africa, commodities producers in Latin America, Middle Eastern oil producers, and European industrial machinery manufacturers. So that has already existed. Now you add to that a big government-led initiative that's going to invest in ports and rail and infrastructure. And if you look around the world, the most prosperous countries, cities, and regions are often those that are also the most well-connected by their infrastructure. So there is no doubt that this is an ambitious initiative, and I think it's one that the world should really welcome.
That's right. We just saw the first Chinese direct cargo train arrive in Tehran from a small commodities port in China.
Absolutely. And a place like Iran could really use more connectivity, particularly since they've been isolated from the global economy for so long.
Pepe, China is also promoting closer economic ties with ASEAN countries in Asia through the One Belt, One Road initiative. How do you see this relationship advance?
Oh yeah, this is absolutely essential because it will run in parallel with the Chinese proposal for a free trade agreement in Asia, which is not obviously the Trans-Pacific Partnership being applied by the Obama administration. It's the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is as ambitious as TPP, in fact, even more ambitious than TPP, and links China with all its commercial partners throughout Southeast Asia, and it happens to be their largest commercial trade partner. It's already China. So we're going to have short examples, for instance. In Indonesia, they were in competition with the Japanese to build the first high-speed rail between Jakarta and Bandung. It was a very complicated decision for the Indonesian government. And in the end, the Chinese won because of the quality of their proposal and because it was cheaper than the Japanese as well. In Thailand, across Indochina, let's put it this way, they're going to build a lot of high-speed rail as well. In Thailand, at the moment, it's a huge debate because it's getting enmeshed into Thai politics, which we all know it's a kind of black void, isn't it? So, but the connections are all there. With Myanmar, the same thing, building of ports. Cambodia, I was in Cambodia earlier this year. Cambodia economy is completely integrated with China. So one belt, one road. In fact, the Maritime Silk Road going through Southeast Asia and parts of sub-branches of the new Silk Road going to Southeast Asia, big win-win situation for Chinese companies, for the Chinese government, and in terms of trade and commerce, overstepping political problems between some Asian countries and China.
Duncan, financial reform was an important part of the Chinese 13th five-year plan. We know that the Chinese goal is to move the yuan towards becoming an international currency by 2020. What came out of these two sessions that was important in your view on financial reform?
Well, I think it's really a re-emphasis of the commitment to financial liberalization. One of China's targets, obviously, is to have market forces exerting more say over the allocation of resources in the economy, and part of that is this liberalization of interest rates, the opening of the capital account, and the gradual sort of liberalization of the exchange rate. And I think China's still committed very much to progress on all of those, which in some ways is a reassuring thing, given that we have seen a little bit of concern in recent months over issues such as capital outflows. I think one of the things that we have clearly seen from officials is that even as there are concerns over how to manage those flows, and you may see a little bit of incremental movement backwards and forwards as they try and sort of tackle that difficult task, there is still this commitment to opening up there. And on the capital account side, I think that's very interesting. One of the things that came out of the announcements that the Premier was making, for example, was that the government is moving towards more fiscal stimulus. Now, China, of course, has very low levels of external debt at the moment. I think one of the things we may well see going forward is an effort to bring more foreign capital into the domestic capital markets. And that will be able to help in ways such as funding higher government deficits as the government attempts to prop up the economic growth rate in the coming years.
I want to move now on to foreign policy. Afshin, Premier Li Keqiang talked about foreign policy. Did you see any major changes in what he was saying at that news conference? I mean, we did learn earlier that China is going to be safeguarding its overseas interests. Anything on the relationship with Japan?
Well, you know, I think that what I focused on was, you know, this continued use of this term, you know, major country relations, you know, and Premier Li brought it up and others brought it up, you know, and the Chinese leadership has been talking about this for a while, and I think
that's the relationship between China and
the United States, exactly, yeah, and they really are cognizant of this idea. There's this international relations theory, as you know, that says that a rising power is always going to come into conflict with the existing superpower, and you know, I'm of the view that there's nothing inevitable in international relations, and the fact that they are really thinking deeply about this idea of major country relations, I think is very important. And when you look at what they say, when they talk about win-win cooperation, avoiding conflict, and each side respecting their core interests. The problem, of course, Anand, is that where China defines its core interests sometimes intersect with where the United States define its core interests, and particularly the area of tension is the South China Sea. Officials here in Washington, at this very senior level, all say that managing the South China Sea, though it doesn't make a lot of headlines the way ISIS make headlines, is probably the most important U.S. foreign policy management goal that they have going forward.
Pepe, Premier Li also talked about China's relationship with its neighbors. Let's take a listen to what he said. Let's watch this.
It's up to the efforts of the countries in the region to maintain regional stability and harmony in the neighborhood. It is also natural that some differences may arise between neighbors. But we believe that as long as we all treat each other with sincerity and seek peaceful settlements to differences through diplomatic means, regional stability will be maintained.
Will that reassure China's neighbors?
So it's a very sound affirmation, isn't it? Because this is what China is been selling across ASEAN, in fact, and to individual ASEAN countries. The problems that we have in the South China Sea, we need an overall, everybody sitting at the same table and discussing with ASEAN as a whole. The Chinese know that this is impossible because the ASEAN members, Vietnam, Philippines, they are bickering among themselves because some of their problems, let's put it this way, in the South China Sea do not concern exclusively China. They have problems among themselves as well. So this evolving ASEAN position to the South China Sea has been a chimera for the past 3 or 4 years at least. The Chinese know it. They know there's dissension inside the bloc. They would like to negotiate with the bloc as a whole. They know at the same time it's impossible, and at the same time everybody's advancing facts on the ground. China much more than the other ASEAN countries at the moment. So there's no other solution, considering that these are China's top trade commercial partners.
Right, Zhou Yui, I just want to get back to something that Afshin raised a moment ago, and that is the rising international tensions in the region over these islands in the South China Sea. How is that resolved? I mean, is there a problem here with, as we hear from the United States, the definitions of what happens in the South China Sea? And China doesn't want its territorial integrity to be violated, and the United States says, well, there's a problem over where those borders are drawn.
Yes, there are actually a lot of divergences of interest in terms of Asia policies between China and the U.S. The U.S. has been pivoting to Asia and has been doing so for some years. Recently, Mr. Obama talked to the Atlantic magazine, the magazine. He said the U.S. has been able to mobilize most of Asia to isolate China in ways that have surprised China. But really, China has been the biggest trading partner to almost all the ASEAN countries, and when China established an international infrastructure bank, Asian countries came to knock on the door in droves. When U.S. wants to isolate China by inviting ASEAN leaders to include a clause on its communique on South China Sea, simply Asian leaders turn away their heads. So I think you always have to remember, for ASEAN countries, America may be a geopolitical concept, but China is a geographical reality. There is no way that most Asian countries will turn away from China and band with U.S. to fight China. There might be occasions that some countries might use the rivalry between big powers and play one against the other to gain some advantages. But at the end of the day, they know they have to live with a stronger China. That is a safer bet. I think China has been making smart calculations in this. On one hand, China has been trying to up the economic cooperation with Asian countries, which is essentially mutually beneficial. On the other hand, China has been cautiously gaining military and geopolitical strength because it still needs to defend its interests and claims in the South China Sea, which it obviously believes. But I don't think this is China becoming assertive or aggressive, as many say. It may look like that, but China has always been maintaining those claims for centuries. It is just China was too weak to really back them up with strength. And now with this newfound power, China simply has a better chance to do that. I think the U.S. also understands that. It just simply wants to stall the process and upset the momentum.
Duncan, Chinese officials are saying, and I'm quoting here, positive momentum in the China-Europe ties is not an expedient but an inevitable choice of both, and Europe has come to view China's development and rise in a more objective and sensible way. Now, you've written about how the United Kingdom, for instance, judged the international mood about the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank better than the United States. Has Europe been more realistic, more practical here in its relationship with China, and has the United States allowed itself to let ideology, politics get in the way?
I don't really think it's an issue of politics. I think there is, the US always has a very sort of hard negotiating position, and I think in many ways it's very keen that Chinese firms don't get access to its markets before its firms get access to Chinese domestic markets in the same way. And in many ways, the US is arguing from a position of strength. It's a much larger economy than Europe as a whole, and it's also doing much better economically. So from that perspective, the US sort of has a relatively positive position to start from. But I do think in other respects, Europe's attitude is certainly much more positive. One shouldn't sugarcoat that relationship, obviously. There's big disagreements over issues such as steel exports from China, which the EU accuses China of dumping on its markets. But in general, certainly Europe is much more open to Chinese investment. And I think in many respects, that actually is a very beneficial relationship from both sides. Certainly in the UK's instance, Chinese capital is being very important in boosting infrastructure spending. And that relationship is going forwards at great speed. Other parts of Europe, it varies a little bit depending on country-to-country relationship. Germany, for example, relatively positive. In some Eastern European countries, perhaps a little less positive. But it's a learning experience on both sides, I think.
Okay, go ahead.
If I may, I'd just like to add that I think this was a missed opportunity in Washington. I mean, if there's ever a non-controversial topic where you can have win-win cooperation, it's infrastructure investment, right? And infrastructure investment that will help build growth, because I think, in our colleague in China referred to President Obama's interview with the Atlantic magazine, and when he was asked about the most pressing challenge, he talked about climate change. Maybe in the long run, but as the old adage goes, in the long run, we're all dead. But I think in the short and medium term, the most pressing challenge that we face is this global economic slowdown that is going to affect jobs, unemployment, underemployment. It's going to affect global migration patterns as well. And I think if the United States participated with China in infrastructure initiatives, One Belt, One Road initiatives, it's one way, it's not the only way, but it's one way to contribute to the economic growth that the entire world needs right now.